through my meditation practice, what you just described, which is I could literally transmute my energy from fear into courage. I could walk in there. Every time I walked in there and got a good result, I walked out, I was an expert, and I learned.
Yeah.
Hadn't read this or heard about this anywhere, but I started telling my kids about it. Like, we can change our energy.
Welcome to the What I Meant to Say podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Jones, founder of Be Better Media and a mom of 4, passionate about human connection. Throughout my journey, I have experienced many What I Meant to Say moments, but since life doesn't give us do-overs, I've created a space to reflect and tell our stories again with a little more grace for ourselves and the hope that we can help others and be better for having listened. Welcome to the What I Meant to Say podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Jones, and I'm here today with Ann Grant, a divorce attorney from the South Bay and the author of The Divorce Hacker's Guide to Untying the Knot. And when I met Ann, I actually came to her book talk, and I was so moved by her growth mindset and positive positive outlook on how to go forward in life when you've hit the stumbling block of a divorce, which is what it felt like to me. And so I just knew that you'd make a great guest, and thank you so much for coming in to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, this topic is one that I have been, in some ways, I was afraid to tackle for a long time in a public space, because it's one that affected my life so deeply and really put me on the trajectory of wanting to promote generational healing. And I didn't realize when I went through my divorce that what at the time felt like the worst thing that could happen could be the biggest catalyst for growth that I ever experienced. And I know that that message resonates in your book, and I'm just excited to dig into these topics and kind of break them down as to how to come through this and be better. So
I love this opportunity because this topic is really near and dear to my heart. And so I'm excited to talk to you about it today.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about your own story and maybe how it played into your law practice today?
I'd be happy to. So I certainly didn't grow up thinking or hoping that I would be a divorce lawyer. In fact, quite to the contrary, I was a corporate litigator at a big international law firm downtown LA. And my husband also worked as a corporate litigator downtown. We lived in Manhattan Beach. We have 3 children. From the outside looking in, it looked like we had a pretty kind of perfect life. We were successful. The kids seemed to be doing great. We traveled with our friends and so on and so forth. And then it really all kind of just came to a crashing halt. As these things go, they build up over time. But nevertheless, it became clear to me on a Tuesday night when my now ex-husband came home later than I expected that we needed to end our marriage. And so I was the one that ended our marriage. That coincided with a couple of other events. The law firm where I had been practicing as a partner for a number of years dissolved. This was during the financial crisis in around the early kind of mid-2000s. And then during the same time period, my father, who I was very, very close to, and was really helping me with my kids while I was trying to get back on my feet, he passed away. So I had what I would call really the perfect storm of crises happen all at once. And it really brought me to my knees. The coping skills that I had developed over the years, exercise and good habits were inadequate to deal with the amount of stress given the uncertainty that was happening in my life. And so I had, I was listening to Brene Brown as I was driving over here today.
Huge fan. Yeah.
And she was talking about her own spiritual awakening. And I, assumed we'd be chatting about my story today. But there's really, I'm going to be vulnerable. She's a big proponent of that. And I think that's the only way that we can really be of assistance to others. So I really did have what I'll come out now and say was a spiritual awakening. And through that process, I deepened my meditation practice. And, everything that I had held dear had just literally fallen apart within the span of a few months of each other. This happened very quickly. My ex-husband left. I was pretty much left with these 3 very young children. I didn't have a way to generate any income.
Scary.
And my father had died. So like the floor just fell out from under me at a point in my life when I thought things were pretty level set. So what I learned through this process, and I've been thinking about this a lot, I think it's really helpful to share with our listeners that when you're in that very uncertain place, that's really where the magic can happen. Because that's fertile ground for needed change and, like you said, growth.
Yeah.
And so through this process, I did begin working again. And I wanted to, as I figured out how to navigate my way through a very difficult divorce situation, I wanted to be of service. And so I started a support group for women who were contemplating divorce because I understood how scary it was. Mm-hmm. And I didn't envision that I'd become a family law attorney. I was doing it with a friend of mine who's a therapist, wanting to give back, to be of service. And I think this is an important concept to embrace. So that was my intention. But what happened is there was a gal in this group who asked me if she could meet with me, and she wanted some legal advice. And I represented her, and it ended up being a fairly significant, complex divorce. But because of my legal skills that I'd honed and the years that I had spent in the courtroom, combined with my experience, because my divorce lasted for quite a long time and I went through a lot.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can hit on.
I was able to get her an amazing results. And I realized this was my calling. Like, I had an epiphany. And so my practice from that point on grew very organically. I decided that I wanted to write a book.
Yeah.
Kind of like the what to expect when you're expecting of divorce, because that didn't exist when I was going through it. So I did. And out of that, then my practice really grew. But that's how it came about. And I love what I do.
Yeah. I mean, it's so inspiring to see, because obviously you had the legal background and the training from, the education, but to see how your life experience really catalyzed that growth. Because so often I think we feel like there's a self-worth issue when you go through divorce. And I think even on a lot of other platforms, that if you don't feel like you belong in that space, you might not see the opportunities that are there for you to help other people, right? And I think that self-worth piece is something that absolutely just gets, it's really difficult when you're coming through a divorce. So for you to know that and help other women when they are in that space to come through it, it's so inspiring. And that I don't think that's something you can learn, and you don't learn that in law school. You learn that from life. Right. And so when we blend those things, our professional training with our life experience, I think really amazing things happen. And
that's been my experience.
Yeah. So you said something about tapping into the magic of, kind of the dark night of the soul, right? Like you don't feel like anything good is going to come out of this. What are some tools that you would tell people that could help them when you're in that space and it's so hard to see the potential good? How do you navigate your way through that?
So what I did is I really drilled down. In my book, I refer to it as wellness. And each chapter in the book has a discussion about these tools. But I really drilled down into my meditation practice, which I combine with my prayer practice. I did a lot of turning it over to my higher power because things were just out of my control.
Yeah.
And I allowed myself to, through some of the readings that I did, I taught myself that, because I was very anxious, that the uncertainty was an opportunity. And then I trained myself to listen to my intuition. If I hadn't done that, I would not have started this support group, and I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing today. I also would not have probably agreed to meet with this gal who needed legal advice, because I wasn't a divorce lawyer. I've been through my own very high conflict divorce, which went on for 5 years, and learned a lot. But I think it's really important to understand that in order to be courageous and step outside of our comfort zone, and this is a Brene Brown concept, we have to be vulnerable. You know, and I have learned through my work, I still do this today too. I don't know if you know who Phil Stutz is, but he's a very famous, renowned psychiatrist, and there's a show on Netflix now called Stutz.
Oh, okay.
And he talks about embracing the shadow. He works with a lot of celebrities, a lot of actors. So he talks about embracing your shadow. And this is a really important concept. I think one way to think about it is it's kind of like what we're doing today. We're having a vulnerable, authentic conversation about things that, leading up to this discussion today, you were describing to me about how, these are my words, not yours, but divorce was sort of a dirty word. And this is a pet peeve of mine, because in my experience, what I did and you did, which is recreate ourselves and become excellent role models for our daughters, our sons, and other women, is very, very courageous. And I do think that to the extent that divorce is sort of taboo or a dirty word, we really need to change that, because doing what you did, doing what I had to do, pulling ourselves up, really kind of, I think of it as pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. I had to start all over. And now I'm going to be really vulnerable. Like we lost our big house in Manhattan Beach. We moved to a whole different part of town in a tiny little house. My children were probably the only kids in the Manhattan Beach schools who each had one pair of shoes. I remember my son leaving for school, and he's like, Mom, or he was getting ready to leave, and he's like, I can't find my other shoe. And I was like, well, you know, I don't know what to tell you. And we really learned to be grateful and work hard, and then again, listen to my intuition.
Well, and you really do learn going through it, like, what are the things that really matter? Right? What is really important? And that gratitude practice, that was a huge one for me. Gratitude is such a game changer. And if you pay attention in the wellness world, we'll hear that a lot. You can have a gratitude journal, a jar, or there's so many practices, but people do not, until you really start doing that, you don't realize how much that does relieve the anxiety that you feel in the unknown.
It's the key. It opens the flow of positive energy. And to this day, if something is going sideways, which of course happens every day in our lives, the only thing we can control is ourselves. We can't control anybody else around us. And so the gratitude flow, the gratitude meditation allows, and Phil Stutz has this diagram of it, an actual sketch that he shows that, you know, this black cloud of worry just, it parts, and it gives you access to whatever you think of as source or higher power. And that's kind of what I refer to in tapping into the magic, to get the guidance you need to step out of your comfort zone. Otherwise, you're just going to be doing the same thing every day. And this is all about being better.
Right. And those small habit changes, right? And it's like, I feel like this be better for me it was such a slow progress, because, you know, James Clear writes about 1% better, or, you know, the power of habits. And it's like, it's those little things that you can do when you're in the thick of it that, yes, give you some peace in the moment, but that over time they add up, but you can't see it. When you're in that fog and you're in this really scary place, you can't see what's coming. And the reframe that I've learned to embrace is the excitement
Yes.
and that you can't see what's coming, rather than the fear.
I love that.
And that was a big game changer for me. And I don't know if that's something you've used with your clients.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So I discovered this, and then with some people and writers and authors and speakers that are pretty evolved, I'm hearing more people talk about this. So again, I'm going to be very vulnerable. So I've been practicing law for a long time, but the work I was doing at a big law firm representing Fortune 500 companies was very different from what I was required to do when I first started out with starting my own law practice.
Yeah.
So, whereas I'd had a team of people who would help us when we were going to trial and, handle the IT and all that, it was just me when I first started. I have a bigger support system now,
Yeah.
but not when I was first starting out. And I was pulled in so many directions. I'm sure you experienced this through your divorce, where you also have children, and you're trying to figure out how to do all the things. There's a lot you're juggling. There's a lot of balls in the air.
Yeah.
And I would get really, really anxious about going to court, where I'm dealing with issues that I hadn't really dealt before, maybe except in my own case.
Right.
So I was a seasoned lawyer, but I didn't have that level of family law experience yet at that point in time. And I really, really cared about getting the best possible results for my client. I put a lot of pressure on myself.
Okay.
So I was feeling really tremendous anxiety. And of course, when you show up in a courtroom, a lot of that, or whether you're showing up in a conference room, a courtroom, or on a basketball court, confidence is really key.
It is.
And so I learned through my meditation practice what you just described, which is I could literally transmute my energy from fear into courage. I could walk in there. Every time I walked in there and got a good result, I walked out. I was an expert, and I learned.
Yeah.
Hadn't read this or heard about this anywhere, but I started telling my kids about it. Like, we can change our energy.
Yes.
And once we know, I think of it as a form of alchemy.
Yes.
That really feels like magic, but it's not. I mean, there's a method to doing it. That was my experience.
Yeah, and I love the way you put that in the energy terms, because there is so much psychology to it, but there really is just a natural energy to the way that the world works. And when you start to open yourself up, you start attracting like minds, and you're pulling yourself out, but then the people come around that help elevate you. And it really does feel like alchemy, right? And it's not,
Yes.
I worked with a mentor who talks about alchemy over strategy. And I think for perfectionists, there's a lot of type A'ers, perfectionist types out there. I mean, I'm learning to let go of that stuff. And that concept of alchemy over strategy, and knowing that you can't check every single box, you're not going to get every single thing right, and letting go of the things you can't control, it's so powerful.
Oh, absolutely. It really is about energy, and not to get too woo-woo, but to the point you just said about attraction. So as we do this, as we shift our energy through a practice of gratitude, through shifting our energy from fear to courage, and we start showing up for ourselves. What happens, I think, is our vibrational, the energy that we're exuding starts to improve.
Right.
And kind of spin upwards like this. And so we call like energy to us, like you inviting me to be on your podcast.
Yes.
Me getting to talk about a topic that is a little different from what I'm usually asked about, which is, separate property, community property, those left brain issues.
Yes.
And so like attracts like. And we do hear about this a lot, sort of in terms of like romantic relationships or whatnot, but it really impacts every part of our lives. And it really changes the quality of our lives in vast ways that I don't think we can understand until we've experienced it.
Right. And you're getting a lot of that is bringing in the concept of generational healing, right?
And so when we do these things for ourselves,
it's not our kid. It's not what we tell our kids. It's what they actually see.
Yeah.
Right. The model that's going on in the home.
Right.
And I remember realizing like that I wanted my daughters to see a stronger model. And as I focused on that as I came through my divorce of how can I be a stronger version of myself so that I'm setting that example for them so that maybe they attract a different type of relationship. And sometimes you can do things for your kids that you might even have a hard time doing it for yourself, but you look at your daughter and you go, oh, wait, I can do this for her.
I need to speak to this point.
Yeah.
So those of us who've been through a divorce or facing one, we know that it doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
You know, like I had this epiphany on a Tuesday night, but I've been like praying about it for a couple of years. And then, I got my answer. But I have a good friend who, not, probably like you, like not many people knew what was going on, but a trusted friend did. And prior to that, she had said to me, look, if you can't leave for yourself, you need to do this for your daughter. And that really struck me. And in my practice, I have said that a few times to clients where I see that they're stuck. And I think that's a really important point that you're raising, that needs, we need to really, really let that sink in. Our children, my children, your children, learn by watching what we do and how we are, not by what we say. And to be a strong role model for them, particularly given the challenges that our children face, there's no more important legacy that we can leave.
Yeah.
Not just to our children, but to the planet and to everybody. Like that's the biggest impact we make.
Yes. And the thing is, you'll realize, and I've seen this firsthand, is the way our families operate, the same way our businesses operate, the same way our relationships, like our teams operate, our communities operate. So when things get fractured, it's not as much of a proponent as I am of the nuclear family and the dinner table. And if it's working, I think it's a beautiful thing. But when it's not, we're leaving little footprints of your dinner table's not as enjoyable, right? So you can have that healthy family post-divorce, and I think it's so hard to see before.
Yes.
And getting through that, you're going to get to the value system that was always important to you. And this was something I struggled with. You realize you get on the other the healthier side past your divorce, and that value system is still intact, if not stronger.
Yes. Yeah, I want to speak to this as well. So, because this is a really kind of like crusade of mine. So in the 70s, there were a lot of studies coming through, and in the literature and what was getting out into the, kind of the mainstream was that if you got divorced, your children were going to be toast. They were going to be destroyed by it, and that mindset stuck around for a long time. But a newly released study, like within the last 14 months. Actually, the study reflected what I knew from my own experience, and it was this, that families that stay together for the sake of the children, if the parents are fighting, we already know that's damaging.
Right.
But the other thing that's damaging, which happens a lot, and since I do this now for a living, I am very aware of how prevalent this is. So where a couple is cold and contemptuous with each other, living separate lives, not talking to each other, the children can be equally as damaged by that. And what I found through my own personal experience was that when I started over and created a different family, which was me and my kids, it was much, much better again because it's energetic.
Yeah.
And so there had been one person who really wasn't in alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's not easy being a single mom, it was better and resulted in a more harmonious household than if we had stayed together. And that is what the data shows now. And I think it's critical that people that are staying together because they think that's helpful for their children understand and really internalize what I was told by a therapist, which is as long as the children have one solid parent, they're going to be okay. And
that was one of the most comforting things that anyone ever told me. And it was coming from a friend of mine that's a therapist.
And it's true.
And in the thick of it, I was like, that was something I could just hook into and use that for me to keep growing stronger and be better because...
And we didn't really have any role models of that, but now we can talk about this.
Yeah.
And it's really important that we do.
Yeah.
So that people... I have a lot of women come in whose children are aging out. They're going off to college, and they're coming in and telling me, well, I stayed with my husband because, I thought it was the best thing to do. And when I talk to them, pretty universally, they wish that they had not done that. Often the kids have significant behavioral issues. They can't launch at the right, at what would be a normal time to go away because they're experiencing a lot of issues around that. And a lot of times the women have just been really suffering. So I think it's imperative that we clarify what the facts actually reveal.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation on What I Meant to Say, produced by my company, Be Better Media. To see the world of why we are striving to share inspired edutainment, I invite you to please check out our website, BeBetterMedia.tv. Here you will find all kinds of great stuff from upcoming new productions to lifestyle products and services I personally use and endorse, to links to great books and other podcasts I love and recommend. Please check us out at BeBetterMedia.tv. That's BeBetterMedia.tv. In setting a good example for our kids, we get into that mindset that it has to be a certain way.
I always call it the Christmas card picture, and that idea that it has to be this way for us to be happy.
And I think as I came through, I didn't know how to show up in that space as the strong female when you're in a relationship where maybe you haven't been that way. And I'm wondering, when people come to you, what are some of the other, besides just seeking legal advice, what are some of the other things that you recommend for women who are in that place where they're scared and their self-worth has taken a hit? Do you have other resources within your practice that help women come through this?
I do. So, I can't do everything. So what I've done is I've created a network of helping professionals.
Love that.
Yesterday, for example, I was working with a gal who's a divorce coach. She's a former client of mine, and then she got certified most people don't even know this is something that exists, but she's trained to deal with women in that kind of frozen place, because that happens a lot. I've experienced that, being in that place too. It's no bueno. You want to get out of that place.
Yeah.
So I'll have them work with her. I often have them read my book because there's so many tools in there about things that we can do, from deep breathing and meditation. And I became a yogi through this process. You don't have to be a yogi, but it certainly helps.
That was a game changer for me.
Yeah, standing on your head is good.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
But beyond that, we work with financial advisors. There are certified divorce financial analysts that I often bring in because, of course, a lot of us want to maintain our lifestyle. We don't know how we're going to do that. So they can work with my clients and show them quantitatively there's different levers we can pull to get them where they need to be. And then we also work with, if we need to, parenting co-parenting specialists, because a lot of times when people split up, they have different parenting styles, and when you're setting up two separate households, that can be really an issue. And so there are people that are specialists in this.
That's fascinating,
because
that term co-parenting is used a lot these days. And when I read, if you read about divorce, and it's usually thrown out as a very positive
way to deal with the kids. And honestly, as much heartache as you are going through in your divorce,
you hurt worse for your kids. At least that was my experience. But co-parenting it's a difficult thing to navigate, exactly for the reason you're saying, is maybe you wouldn't even be there because you have such different points of view, right? And are there ways, I mean, how do you guide people through the best way to help your kids through this? And then even when you get through the initial, on the other side of it, it's difficult.
Yes. The majority of the time that my ex-husband and I spent in the courtroom, which was about 5 years, was after the judgment was entered, and it was on co-parenting issues. So I really suffered through this and knew there had to be a better way. And that is why I often, if there are issues there, I'll have people work with co-parenting therapists. So, and what they'll do is really work with the couple to co-parent. But my experience was different. So I had to implement what I refer to as parallel parenting. And what that means is there was no co-parenting happening. So I had my kids most of the time. And the good news was, I got to do things the way I wanted to do things to make certain that they kind of stayed on track with their program, and they each had therapists, and so parallel parenting, and it's a term, I didn't make that term up, it's a term that is used, but we don't see that often because people always talk about co-parenting. But if you cannot co-parent, if your ex has issues that preclude that, which happens, then you have to step up and do what needs to be done. And back to the point we made about, if the children have one solid parent, they're going to be okay, then that is incumbent upon you to do that. And that's why I spent a lot of time talking about these grounding techniques. So you can put, like in the airplane, put the oxygen on yourself before you put it on your children. Take care of yourself, ground yourself so you can show up and be there for them.
Absolutely. Because when we're worried about what's coming, it's very hard to be present with your child. And a lot of the co-parenting, when I hear, and you see people when divorces happen, so much control ends up that need to control things that you really can't control anyway. Do you see that coming through a lot in the divorces that when you're in trial? Like, do you see people that need to control? I look back on mine and go, well, if Tuesdays and Thursdays don't go exactly like this, everything's going to fall apart. Because you're in that fight or flight, and you're in that place where everything feels so scary. So you're trying to control everything you can. And then as time went on for me, I was like, oh my gosh, there's just so much. Like, I'm not going to be able to make this up. I'm not going to be able to be in every single place and do every single thing right so that I can make up for this terrible thing that my kids just went through. And when I started to release that feeling of like, you can't be everything to everybody. You can't control everything that your kids are going to see or do. Now, yes, there are safety mechanisms and ways to, support them and build, that safe network and family around them. But when you can't, you do realize you can't control it all. And I don't know, do you have any advice for someone that's like really in that place I remember being in that allows you to kind of release that sense that you're going to be able to make it better?
Well, I think it's really important to remember that when you're in that place, oftentimes what I find is that the biggest custody disputes, arguments about the children, result in both sides trying to exert control. It's a control battle. The biggest trial I ever had was a custody battle. But what it really boiled down to was just issues of control. And I even went through this in my own experience. So we had gone through a custodial evaluation, and it was arduous and lengthy, and it was time to go to trial. And my children were a little bit older at this point, but they weren't, certainly weren't out of the woods yet. They were still minors. And I had this epiphany. I was driving down the 405. It was like an out-of-body experience. I called up my ex-husband. I hadn't spoken to him in years, except in the context of being in a courtroom. Mm-hmm. And I think he was shocked when I called him, and I said, let's just let the kids decide. And, I kind of had all the ammunition I needed to get where I needed to be, but a miraculous thing occurred, which was as soon as I did that, the energy shifted. Mm-hmm. We weren't going to trial any longer. Some issues that were going on that were very unfavorable, in my opinion, in terms of the children spending time with him, just fell away. Like, just because I stopped doing this and I pulled back. And all of a sudden, like, my son had been in the doctor's office every Monday morning because he couldn't breathe, and we'd run all these tests, but it was stress. That went away. I had been breaking out in hives. That went away. And just in terms of my energy, I was able to, I think my practice doubled at that point, because I was throwing too much energy into this battle. And so things calmed down, and my children then, from that point on, we let them choose, which is kind of unorthodox, but we let them choose where they were going to go. Mm-hmm. And they pretty much chose to be with me as but I was the home base, and they slept at my house. But they would go see their dad more on the weekends than the time he had been allocated in the temporary orders. And I just let them. I was just like, fine. And as soon as I did that, my life got better by multiples. Wow. I started dating again because I wasn't throwing all this negative that's like a lot of negative energy.
Completely.
And so as a result of that epiphany that I had, when I set up my own practice, I knew there had to be a better way. And while I still will go to court when I need to, and I've got the skills to do that, I'm trained collaboratively, as are my other attorneys, so that we can work through the process in a very collaborative way. And we don't go to court when we do that, which avoids this happening as much. Mm-hmm. Because I'm trying to figure out whatever mechanisms I can, and I'm coaching my clients to just, let's shift the energy and not do that.
Yeah.
You really have to have that 30,000 foot view, and that's where the divorce coach is helpful. Mm-hmm. So that you're not so down in the weeds that you get lost in that, and you're fighting over things that maybe are not as important as you think they are in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So for people who don't know the term collaborative divorce, I know that was a little bit on it, but can you define like the difference between that and a regular regular divorce?
Sure. So a collaborative process in the divorce world means that if you were hiring me, for example, to be your collaborative attorney, your spouse would also hire a collaborative attorney. So you have representation, which I think is very important that you have representation, because a lot of things in family law are sort of counterintuitive. So it's important to have somebody, in your court who's explaining to you what you need to be aware of. But what we do, instead of going to a courtroom and creating this sort of energy we've been talking about that isn't helpful,
right?
We'll meet around a conference room table, for example, and we can come up with creative solutions, like ways where maybe mom can stay in the house until the last child graduates from high school, and then have the first right of refusal to buy out the house. And if she doesn't want to, or she can't, then at that point later down the road, the house would be sold and the net proceeds would be split. So things aren't just blown up, for example. That's just one example. But we sign an agreement that we won't go to court. So during the pandemic, we did it by Zoom. I prefer to do it in person because I think, I've learned that 98% of communication is nonverbal.
Yeah.
So it's helpful to have these in-person meetings
Absolutely.
when we can.
Yeah.
We can't always do that. I have clients all over the world, so sometimes they have to zoom in.
Right.
But it's really what I consider to be a pretty enlightened way, a much more enlightened way to move through a divorce. I spend a lot of time when I'm retained talking with my clients about whether a collaborative divorce makes sense. There's certain instances where I might advise against it.
Okay. Would you mind highlight just
So by
when would
its
that
nature, it's collaborative. So
Right.
that means that both parties can come to the table
Mm-hmm.
and compromise. Neither person's going to walk away feeling like they won. It's a compromise.
Yeah.
It's voluntary.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be able to show up.
Yeah.
Sometimes people can't show up. And you need to cooperate,
Yeah.
and so if for some reason somebody is unable or unwilling to do that, then that process may not work. But those of us who are trained in the process really believe in it and work really hard to make the process work. And my clients that have gone through the collaborative process
Mm-hmm.
are by far my happiest divorced clients.
That's awesome. Because that was one thing when I went through mine. I've tried to think about it since then, but like I was very opposed to you're already feeling so much shame that you're going through this. And then I remember thinking, well, I don't want to shark. I want someone that's going to help me just see this through really clearly and maybe without the drama that you see on TV or hear about or read about. But there's also a fine line to make sure that you really are protected. And I think that that's such an important thing for women to realize with hiring an attorney, is for that attorney to understand the state of mind that woman is in, because she can't necessarily see where she's going to get. And I think, do you ever look and do you feel like you can see the other side before your client can see?
Every day.
Yeah.
Every day. And I think something to be aware of, and the reason I'm a big proponent of collaborative is because you do have representation.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to having just a mediator, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a way to get a divorce where you just have a mediator in between.
Yes. So mediation is when I sometimes act as a mediator. I'm a neutral. So I'm not representing you or your spouse.
Okay.
I'm just trying to facilitate an agreement. So whatever you agree on is fine with me.
Okay.
So I'm not telling you what is in your best interest. This is why I feel it's so important that even if you mediate, often people will hire me to be their consulting attorney, and women should understand that their spouses probably have somebody in the corner for them that they may not know about who are advising them. So it's very important to have someone giving you advice. I've had a lot of women come to me who are divorced, who went through mediation, who've told me that, or they've asked me if I can change things that they agreed to.
Mm-hmm.
Once you sign that document, there's always a lot of provisions in there that make it pretty challenging to get out of it.
Yeah.
So it's really important. It's probably for most women going to be the most important financial decision they'll make in their life.
Yeah.
So it's not something to be rushed through, and the other thing is you shouldn't assume that your spouse has your best interest at heart when you're going through a mediation. Because I've had a lot of women come in who have stories to tell. I represented a gal who was in mediation. She was in marriage therapy, then in mediation, and she came to me and we discovered that while she was in mediation, her husband had gone to Brazil and married another woman and moved most of their assets to Brazil. So it was a setup. And that's a pretty extreme example.
Sure.
But it's really important to make certain that you're protected.
Yeah.
And you can be protected and still move through it without having to battle it out.
Yeah.
that's I think the benefits of the collaborative process.
Yeah, and I think it's really removing that stigma that somehow it makes you a bad person, or that
No.
you know what I mean?
It would be imprudent not to.
Yeah.
When it's such so many important decisions are being made.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think, when we're coming through these types of relationships, if we've been in the people-pleasing role, if we're dealing with codependency, people don't realize when they look back in their family line and see, wow,
these things were brewing, and in part it can take some of that help you. It's not that there's someone to blame, but it's an understanding of the patterns that
get you into certain modes of thinking that lead to these types of relationships.
Right.
So, I often notice there's alcoholism,
Yes.
there's mental health issues, or the way that we treat our bodies, our minds, and our spirits has been going on. And I love, the Native Americans say that our choices go back 7 generations.
I
right?
believe that.
And it's such a beautiful and motivating concept to me, because nobody's all bad or all good, right? I mean, we're not our worst day or our best day. We're a sum of all of these choices. And I just think that, understanding the way our families are set up and being able to look back and go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that, my dad had been dealing with, alcoholism in his family, or, my sister had been struggling with this. It impacts the person that you become, and then you attract a certain relationship.
That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah, codependency is, I see this a lot. I was meeting with a gal yesterday, a new client whose husband is an alcoholic. And as I sat and listened to her, I began to realize that I was dealing with really a battered woman, even though she hadn't been physically abused. And it was such a deep, fortunately, the divorce coach was working with me as we were going through this. So it's so deep seated that even though it was very evident that she needed to move forward and serve him, because as soon as you do that, he can't just start moving assets around, and we thought that he might be. So there was a really good reason to do this now.
Mm-hmm.
She came up with a reason that wasn't a good reason as to why we couldn't. And I needed both the divorce coach and her therapist to explain to me today.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, what's going on with this? And they're like, well, she's having a trauma response. So I'm seeing this a lot. So during the pandemic, people were shut down that have been living their separate lives. And so as a result of that, my practice really exploded and continues to grow. And I have many, many people coming in. I feel like almost every person who comes in is telling me, not every person, but many, that, my husband or my wife, but it's a lot of husbands, he had a drinking problem, and it really became pronounced during the pandemic, and I just can't do this anymore. And then in dealing with them, what you see is that the wives of people with substance abuse often are very codependent, and they don't have the same symptoms, but they really sometimes struggle with disentangling themselves.
Yep.
And it's energetic.
Yeah.
And it's a real thing. And it's something I deal with it every single day. So I'm very cognizant of this challenge. And I think for people that are in that situation, that you asked me what tools there are. There's a lot of tools.
Yeah.
There's Al-Anon,
yes,
which is an amazing program, and really helps women in particular, I think, and men too, regain their footing, their sense of self, so that they're not people-pleasing, like in overdrive.
Right.
And they've got to really start looking out for their own best interests, and sometimes they just don't know how.
Yeah.
So it's a process. That's why I think it really does kind of take a village and a team to move people through each of these phases. And that's why in the book and in my practice, I really look at holistically not just the legal piece, but I bring in other people, and you're one of those people as a life coach who can work with clients to help them re-envision how to recreate their life from the ground up.
Yep. It's huge, and it really does take a village. I'm continually amazed at how all the little things matter. I mean, even going back to trusting your gut. I mean, the quality of the food that you're putting in your body allows you to trust your gut.
Right.
Like the meditation and yoga allows you to quiet your mind so that you can see clearly. And they're simple little things, and you don't have to do them all at once, because I think that's something else that people can get really bogged down by, and that in itself can be a trauma response. That procrastination of like, I can't do it, like not today, and then you stay stuck.
Yes, I see that a lot.
Right?
Yeah.
And and people don't realize that procrastination and putting things off is a trauma response.
Yeah, I also encountered that. I've moved through that now because I've had so many challenges that forced me to do it. And this is one of those Phil Stutz things where he talks about this. The only way, well, this is me talking now, but he does talk about this in his book. But like the only way through it is through it. Like you just got to go.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be perfect.
Right.
You just got to like get dressed, get up, get dressed, get going. And the more you do that and exercise that muscle, the better off you are. Because I do see a lot of my new clients coming in right now that are in these situations where they come in and they're good to go. And then they're just chasing their tail. They're like, well, I can't focus on that because I've got to focus on this trip that we're taking. It's like, look, if we don't focus on this and get our arms around this, there aren't going to be any more trips.
Right.
Sometimes I feel like I almost have to shake them.
Yeah.
Because they're not prioritizing the things that matter. They're getting bogged down in the details and kind of using it almost as an excuse to not deal with the things that really need to be given the attention that they deserve.
Right. Because you really have to deal with the big picture.
You really do.
It's the big picture. And for you, when you break that down for your
Clients, I know you break it down in your book, but what's that big picture entail? I know it's financial, it's your well-being, it's dealing with your children.
So there's so many things, and I went through this feeling of sort of feeling I remember standing in my garage and thinking, I don't know where to start. I don't know if I should be packing up to move, or if I should be trying to work more to generate more income, or if I should be like, in the house doing a crossword or playing with my children because they're so
Right.
And
oh
so
my gosh.
Consequently, I was standing there in my nightgown in the garage at like 10:30 in the morning, just frozen.
Yes.
That's why I wrote the book, because not everything has to happen at the same time.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation with Anne Grant as much as I am, and I really encourage you to check out the Divorce Hacker's Guide to Untying the Knot, what every woman needs to know about finances, child custody, lawyers, and planning ahead to get on the other side of a divorce better, stronger, and ready for your future. Available on Amazon and at Barnes & Noble. That's why I started my blog, because I thought, no matter what, I want my kids to know what I was thinking as I was going through this. And I had wished that I could find something. One of my first thoughts was I wish I had something from past generations of my family so I could figure out how this all happened. Because it wasn't a blame thing. It was just like, how the heck did I end up here?
Right.
Because from the outside looking in, it's all pretty rosy, right? Yeah. But there's all the generational, and that's where this driving force has come from me to tell stories, because I think when we are vulnerable and we talk to people and we say, like, I've been through this, most of the time you end up, that person goes, yeah, me too. They don't go.
Nothing more powerful than Me Too, and not the movement, but having that connection.
Yep.
And it's great that you're doing this work, because it hasn't been talked about, I don't think, really at all.
Yeah.
What we're talking about at this level. And I think it's probably going to be very helpful for a lot of people. I never felt ashamed or I had a different experience when I ended my marriage. I've been kind of hand-wringing for a couple of years about what was the right thing to do. And so I'm praying for a sign. So when I got my sign and knew I needed to end it, I felt just relief and excitement. And so I have had to really dig deep and I feel like now I do have empathy and compassion for this other way of being, which is more common, which is to feel shame and like a sense of failure, I guess, over getting a divorce. But I'd really like to work to change that, because I just don't see it that way at all. In fact, I think it's a very honest way to be, a very authentic way to be, and you're being true to yourself if it's not working out. And I think that you're doing the best thing for everybody involved, your children and spouse included, to not live a lie.
Yeah. I mean, it keeps you stuck, right?
And that's what the data shows now too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and so it doesn't mean that, and I don't know what the data is on this, but it doesn't mean that your children are gonna. You can show them how to go on and have healthier relationships because you made the choices that you made, rather than being stuck in that shameful space. Because we know that anything we're ashamed of, whether it's a divorce or an addiction, it just piles on.
There's nothing good. Shame is a useless emotion. There's no value to it. It is a very negative emotion, and lots has been written about it. Brene Brown has written books about it. But anything you can do to eradicate it through your personal wellness practice is certainly a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah.
And I think it gets passed down generationally too. It's very heavy. It's
Agreed.
sticky.
Yes. It's very black and white. It's very right and wrong. If, divorce is wrong, or, there are just so many places that we can get stuck thinking that it has to be a certain way or else. And it's just not true.
Nope, it's just not true. It's just not the way it is.
Yep. So one of the questions I love to ask everybody that comes on What I Meant to Say is, what is a piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
Don't be scared. Everything's going to be okay. Trust your gut. And take chances.
Yeah, it's a big one. And that's all about banishing that fear, right? Don't be scared. So the way you looped that back around, the only way you can take chances is when you let go of the fear.
That's right.
And turn it into the curiosity and...
Be curious and turn the fear into excitement.
Yeah.
And your life will grow exponentially.
I love it. I love it. And you've done that from, to change and go to start your own law firm and be able now to help so many women coming through a difficult situation that can really give rise to so much growth and so many healthier families.
And so much freedom and happiness. The joy I've experienced as a single mother, when I stood at the top of Machu Picchu with my son, a place I never imagined I would go and only went there because of him, I realized that anything was possible. And that's been the journey that I've been on, and my mission is to let other people know that is possible for them as well.
Yeah, and you're giving them the building blocks to get there. That's the amazing thing. It's like it doesn't all happen in one day.
Oh no.
And
it's a process.
It's a process. And for people to understand and then just build that community around you that can help you get through and make those choices and enjoy the process.
And hold you accountable.
Yeah, that's huge.
What the book was about, is to walk you through the process so that you don't get stuck, and you know that you don't have to decide what to do about your house on day one. We'll deal with that later. But right now, here are the things that you do need to do. I mean, it's not a perfect template, but it does help give you some direction about how to prioritize things.
Yeah,
because I struggled with that myself.
That's really empowering to have somebody that can help you really break it down.
Yeah.
When you're in that very, scared and
one day at
challenging
a time.
space. It is definitely one day at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And then it all starts to add up to really amazing things. How old are your kids now?
So my youngest, my son is 21. He'll be graduating from college. And then my daughter is 26. She's going to grad school, and my oldest daughter is 35, and I have 3 grandsons.
Wow. And so you're doing this, I mean, the generations are just building, and it's just incredible to see when people really just take on the challenge in life and let it be a catalyst for growth. It's just my favorite thing to see. It's the best example we can set for our kids. And one of my favorite things to say is self-awareness is the greatest gift we can give to the next generation. And you're helping people do that. So thank you so much for what you do in our community and for empowering women to make good choices for themselves so they can set examples for those next generations.
Thanks for having me here today.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you. And so thank you so much for joining us on What I Meant to Say. And until next time, I just want to remind you to be real, be you, and be better.
Thank you so much for listening to What I Meant to Say. If you enjoyed this conversation, you know what to do. Subscribe, rate, review. And for more great content, courses, and lifestyle, go to BeBetterMedia.tv. Some of these stories contain sensitive content about real-life events, and all of the information in this podcast and from anywhere on the Be Better Media website is for informational purposes only. If you find that you need help, which we all do from time to time, please reach out to a licensed professional for help.